So I was reading an article this weekend, actually, New York Times op-ed about James Comey. Name should ring a bell for most of you. James Comey was or has been, a headline fixture for a while, like over a decade. First as FBI director overseeing the previous Clinton email investigation, in shaking up the 2016 election with his pre-election announcement, then being fired by President Trump in 2017 while the Russia probe was underway. And since then, he's been in the news as a best-selling author, a very outspoken critic of Trump, and most recently, the first former FBI director to be indicted by a sitting president's justice system. And so the New York Times op-ed that I was reading frames the indictment as the culmination of a transparently vindictive campaign. It's language, if you were to read it, that's so heated it practically vibrates off the page and reminds us how ridiculously one-sided political coverage can be. The funny part about it is, to me, I don't normally read the New York Times. A few years ago, at the insistence of a friend, I downloaded the Times Games app to play Wordle. Literally the word game, if you're familiar with Wordle. My wife and I have morning battles over it with our coffee. No pop-ups, no junk ads. Just a little ritual we do every little competition every morning. It's become one of my favorite micro competitions of the day. But because of that app, I found myself occasionally clicking over to the newspaper, and particularly the op-ed section, not because I'm craving outrage, but because I like to know what everyone's talking about. And because it's useful to see differing opinions, how the other side frames the story. And that's where this story came across my screen. I read it, I had a reaction, and the reaction was sort of like this, and just as a purist, or one of the purest examples of political noise that you'll find. It was loud, emotionally loaded, designed to provoke fear and a reaction. And the key point that I want you to carry with you is markets don't care about your outrage. The contrast is brutal. Hysteria in politics versus rationality in investing. The more the media pumps up the outrage, the more essential it is for us to bury our political emotions in the backyard. Where others see the end of civilization as long as their side isn't in charge, we can see an opportunity to stay grounded. Because I've said this 1,000 times, when you make investing decisions based upon how you feel, in this case about a president or a party or media buzz, you're getting into dangerous territory. And it's not dangerous or just dangerous intellectually or even ethically. It's disastrous for your future returns or lack thereof. And history is such that presidents, who's in office, doesn't really matter much to long-term investors. Now, if you doubt how little presidents and parties matter to the long-term investor, just go ahead and pull out a chart of the US stock market from, say, 2000 to today. So we're looking at, better part of 25 years. And if you were to do that, you would see a mosaic of red and blue administrations. Bush earlier, Obama, Trump, Biden, then Obama, then Trump again. Yet one continuous upward trend is in the high quality companies. So there are dips, there are panics, there are blowups, but the market itself, it's been marching, then stumbling, then recovering, and then marching again, regardless of who's in the Oval Office. Think about the subprime mortgage crisis. Back in the mid 2000s, it inflated over several years under a very free market Republican administration, the Bush administration. And it burst onto the global economy scene like a bomb. And then came a slow, steady recovery during the 8-year run of Barack Obama, a strongly progressive Democrat. So if you'd had made investment policy out of your feelings about either of those men, you would have been crushed investment wise. And same goes for Trump. 2016, half the country thought the market would collapse the day after he was elected. It didn't. In fact, the S&P surged. And then 2020, when Biden won, the other half of the country thought capitalism was finished. It wasn't. The market went on to post double-digit gains in the early Biden years. The lesson isn't subtle. Politics and headlines are just noise. Corporate profits and long-term value creation are the signal. And that's why I used that phrase earlier about, quote, burying it in the backyard. That phrase isn't about ignoring civic duty or your opinions at all. It's about recognizing that your long-term plan is too precious to be hijacked by short-term emotions. And every time a new political hurricane blows in, someone or something will urge you to panic, cash out, wait until it's over. Don't dig a metaphorical hole in the backyard, throw the emotions in, and bury them and cover them up. Because high quality companies, the ones that we all actually own, or if one were to own, if they own the S&P 500, are the models of rationality in a world that's addicted to hysteria. They don't care who the president is. They care about margins. They care about innovation, adapting to regulation. They will pause in unprofitable activity. They'll preserve capital. They'll reemerge stronger when a storm passes. Because governments can change the rules of the game, but they can't outlaw rationality of self-interest or the ingenuity of a well-run enterprise. In other words, a president can tweet, they can threaten, they can regulate, they can impose tariffs and taxes. They can't force a rational company to lose money for any long period of time. The company either adapts or they exit. When they exit, the capital flows to where it's treated better, which is why capitalism always outlasts the panic of the moment. And this is what makes investing so boring to talk about in the context of politics. While personally I have some strong political opinions, when it comes to the market, there's almost nothing to say beyond stay invested, ignore the noise, focus on your plan. Really, everything else is a sideshow. And if we've been together for a while, you'll know that I love drawing lessons from things like sports and training, CrossFit, or my son's flag football games, or even my experience with helicopters. They're all microcosms of the market. In a brutal workout, for example, when the barbell feels perhaps heavier than it did the day before, and your lungs are on fire, discipline wins. Not theatrics, not panic, simply discipline. Same with investing. When the political noise level hits the max, when the headlines feel like sirens, when everyone around you is sort of sprinting for the exits, you don't. You stay on the plan. You keep breathing. You maintain your form. You trust your training, because the plan, like a great training program, was built for volatility. World-class athletes as we talked about a week or so ago, sometimes stumble. Sometimes we let our emotions drive strategy in the middle of an event. And I've seen everyday investors do the same thing with their money. They break form, they abandon the plan. They chase sort of this sugar high of political certainty. And the result is always the same: injury in the gym, regret in the portfolio. And this is why I ask clients what I consider to be the magical question. When comments or thoughts or questions come up about politics, how do you see this political unrest of the day impacting your beautifully crafted long-term financial plan? Now, most people, realistically, when they stop and think about it, they'll admit the answer is that it doesn't. And that's the right answer. The plan exists precisely so you don't have to reinvent it every time a politician does something thought to be outrageous, for example. And remember, both sides of the aisle, at the extremes in particular, are hypocrites. When their party's in power, they talk about the genius of the markets. When they're out of power, they predict collapse. The pendulum swings have been happening for since the beginning of time. And meanwhile, the great companies of America and the world continue designing better products, hiring great people, generating better cash flow. So here's my challenge to you. Stop using politics as an excuse to deviate from your plan. Don't let politics into the conversation to begin with. Don't let the outrage take up rent space in your head. Build your financial fitness the same way you build your physical fitness, with relentless abandon, boring consistency, and an unshakable belief in the process. Contrary to sometimes a popular belief, markets don't care who's in the White House. Markets care whether you stay in your seat long enough for the compounding to work its magic. And it is magic. And that is entirely under our control, yours and mine. So when the next "this time is different" moment arrives, and it will, just remember this image of just taking those emotions, digging a hole in the backyard, and burying them. Picture yourself walking back into the house, wiping your hands off, calmly resuming your whatever the activity was. Do it enough times and it becomes a reflex. And that reflex is the difference between those who speculate and those who build great wealth over decades.